Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Megan Searing-Young, Director of the Greenbelt Museum. Thanks for your interest in our programs. Just to give some background for those who are new, we're a museum here in Greenbelt, Maryland, which is one of the three experimental green towns built in 1937 as part of the New Deal. The museum is a public-private partnership by the City of Greenbelt and the nonprofit Friends of the Greenbelt Museum. We operate a house museum. We're open on Sundays with tours on the half hour from 1 to 5. We also offer walking tours, a lecture series, and much more. If you haven't already, we encourage you to sign up for our electronic newsletter. We only send 1 to 2 messages per month, and it's a great way to stay up to date on everything we're doing. For more information about us and what we do, please visit our website at greenbeltmuseum.org. Turning to today, the live lecture on this topic was given in July 2024, and it was not recorded. So this video is being made in March 2025, and it is a presentation of the same material. We are so pleased to have with us Stephen Oetken, who'll be giving this talk. He's been a volunteer docent, researcher, lecturer, and walking tour designer for the Greenbelt Museum since 1999. A lifelong Greenbelter, Stephen has degrees in history and historic preservation under his belt, and he enjoys researching Greenbelt's many fascinating storylines. He's even threatened to write a book someday chronicling the rich history of this planned community. Stephen has served on the Friends of the Greenbelt Museum board as both president and secretary, and on several Greenbelt Homes Incorporated task forces that are related to historic preservation. He lives in Greenbelt with his partner Matthew and their black lab, Kona. And I'll turn it over to Stephen now.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Megan. We are going to begin our presentation here just as soon as we switch over our screens. And welcome everyone who is tuning into this video. And this is a presentation entitled Unearthing Greenbelt's Historic Gardens, or as I sometimes like to call it, All the Dirt on Greenbelt's Gardens. This presentation will look at the historic context of Greenbelt's community gardens, such as the locations of these gardens and how these locations changed over time because of the development and growth of Greenbelt. Now, we are always researching these topics, always looking for interesting stories. So if you have any information or stories about Greenbelt Gardens, please share your stories with us. Either email the Greenbelt Museum at www.greenbeltmuseum.org or leave your comments in the section below. A quick word about the sources for today's presentation. We basically are following breadcrumbs in this. So all of these sources were very helpful, beginning with a exhibit that was done by the museum curator Megan Searing-Young in 2012 called Green from the Start, A History of Gardening in Greenbelt, which you can find on the Greenbelt Museum website, and that website is below. Also, very important sources were the Greenbelt Cooperator / Greenbelt News Review, the community's paper that has been publishing since 1937 without missing an issue. Also very important were satellite images taken from pgatlas.com, and all satellite maps are taken from there unless otherwise noted. And black and white photos, primarily from the Library of Congress, unless otherwise noted. And color photos are also from the author, unless otherwise noted. Now, Greenbelt Gardens have been a feature of the planned community since the community opened in 1937, although the first gardens weren't started until 1938 in the summertime. Greenbelt is a very community-oriented activity in Greenbelt. Tending a garden always seems to be a very Greenbelt thing to do. Even if you don't have a garden, you always seem to want a garden. If you're like me, you have a very green thumb. And a quick note that this presentation is not going to be about growing better tomatoes. I couldn't grow a tomato if I tried. This is going to be a history of the gardens. Now, these gardens are important, and they are as much a planned feature of the community as the architecture and the other planning elements such as superblocks and pathways. Gardens were a key element of Ebenezer Howard's Garden City concept, which he introduced in 1898, which involved building smaller towns on the outskirts of major cities surrounded by green space with areas for people to live, work, and play. And also, very importantly, as the red arrows point out, allotment gardens were a large part of the Garden City concept. Now, Mr. Howard was responsible for the creation of two very important garden cities in England, Wet, Welwyn City and Letchworth. And along with his printed works, these two towns were a big inspiration to Rexford Guy Tugwell, who President Roosevelt selected to head the resettlement administration as part of relief effort during the New Deal. Those three green towns, as you may already know, are Greendale, Wisconsin, Green Hills, Ohio, and Greenbelt, Maryland. Very importantly, as part of depression relief, these green towns were seen as a way of giving a hand up, not a handout, because situations in the cities, well, they were a little dire. And the green towns were meant to provide a utopian alternative to living in the cities. Gardens were part of the Greenbelt design from the very start. And this initial sketch and plan of the town, you can see the allotment gardens that were included in the plan from the very beginning. Some terminology that we're going to use in this presentation. Greenbelt gardens in the beginning technically were allotment gardens, which is when a piece of land is subdivided into a few or up to several hundred parcels or plots that are made available to individuals or families for individual non-commercial gardening for growing food plants. Basically, a way to supplement what you have in your kitchen. Those gardens transitioned into victory gardens during World War I and World War II, especially. These food gardens were supplemented food rations and encouraged morale by empowering the contributions of citizens working on the home front. And lastly, the gardens transitioned into community gardens, which is a piece of land gardened by a group of people individually or collectively. The land is divided into individual plots assigned to individuals responsible for the production of food plants in their plot. Again, not a whole lot of difference between the three, but important distinctions to make nonetheless. When we discuss the gardens in this presentation, it is important to note that the garden areas were initially named after the previous landowner, and we're going to use those names as much as possible. Several of the garden areas had other nicknames and other names that we will use as well, but we will primarily stick with those familiar names. Now, we are going to discuss 8 gardens that we have found evidence for in Greenbelt. There may be more that were created and that we just have not found evidence of yet. So if you know of a garden that we don't discuss, a community garden that we haven't discussed in this presentation, again, please feel free to comment in the comment section below or send us an email. Now, it's important to note that the administration of the gardens falls into 2 periods of ownership of the town. First, in 1938 to 1953, when the federal government owned the land and rented out the homes to the residents, the federal government owned the land, and the federal government was responsible for allocating the garden plots to the residents. Then from 1953 to the present, when the town had been sold and was part of Greenbelt Homes Incorporated, the land came under various ownership, but the garden plots were allocated by the garden club from this point on. During the federal ownership of the town, 2 men really played an important role in the functioning of the gardens. The first is Roy Braden, who was the community administrator and town manager from 37 to 42, and Angus McGregor, who was the head of landscaping from 1935 until 1949. Mr. McGregor was the man who was responsible for executing all of the landscaping in Greenbelt. He was responsible for actually being out there and supervising the crews. Mr. Braden served the administrative function. Mr. Braden was well known for issuing memos. The one on the left to fellow Greenbeltian farmers, and these memos were very important in keeping residents abreast of the information surrounding the gardens, such as when they were going to be allocated and when gardens were being closed down for other purposes. Later, Mr. Braden had different assistants who assisted him with the administration of the gardens, most notably Fred Ryers and Harry Falls. There was a numbering system for the gardens. It is frustrating because we don't have any files relating to this numbering system. We do have in the collection of the Greenbelt Museum a small book that belonged to Mr. McGregor that does sketch out some of the garden plots to give us an idea of what the numbering system was like. And then we do have some maps from 1961 when GHI did a survey. The other way we know what the number of some of the gardens added up to is by articles in the Cooperator and News Review, also in the memos that were circulated by Mr. Braden. The garden plots were 50 feet by 50 feet. That's 2,500 square feet for each garden. And they squeezed in 12 garden plots per acre. The federal government, through the cooperative variety store and grocery store, made provisions available to the residents so that they could make the most of their gardening time. You can see that they had various garden implements for sale, as well as seed packets. You could also send away for seed packets. It was a big hobby for those who were very interested in gardening. The seed packets that are pictured here on the right are belonged to Mr. Sherrod East and are in the Tugwell Room collection. Fertilizing, plowing, and watering. Oh my. From the beginning, the federal government under Angus McGregor's crew was responsible for tending to the land. And so they did all the important work in getting the garden plots ready for the planting season. They would also fertilize and harrow the ground. And Greenbelt residents had to make sure that any stakes and fencing that they had was removed so that the government could come through and do that. As time went on into the 1940s, the federal government relinquished a lot of the duties that they had as far as maintenance of the garden plots. They eventually stopped fertilizing and plowing. They at one point decided to charge $1 fee for this, and they even gave up on that. And so Greenbelt residents in the 1940s were on their own. You can see from the insert here that a very enterprising man from Beltsville offered to plow gardens for $2.50 a plot for those who needed it. In 1953, Greenbelt did finally come up for sale, ending the federal ownership of the town. And that is where we're going to leave our story of the administration of the gardens for right now. Now, I'd like to orient the site of Greenbelt for those who may not be entirely familiar. You also will see this slide again. We're going to refer to it a number more times. This was a satellite photo that was taken in 1938, and it shows Greenbelt at the time. It's a fascinating snapshot of our history. But you can see in the center of the photo, you can see the crescent of the town. To the left of that, you can see the unique shape of Greenbelt Lake. And then the road system that encompasses Greenbelt, you can see Edmonston Road running along on the left side of the screen from bottom to top. You can see Greenbelt Road running along the bottom, and you can see Ridge Road and Crescent Road that make up the surrounding part of the ridge. You can also see that Crescent Road extending past the lake where it intersected with Edmonston Road. And I'd also like to point out at the top right of the screen a dirt road called Northway Extended, which we will refer to again. The original garden locations, there were four of them, and we're going to start with those because two of those still remain with us today. They are important sites. So the first one that we're going to discuss is the water tower. Now, this is a very little known site. It existed from 1938 to about 1947. We say 1947 because it was last mentioned in the Greenbelt Cooperator in that year. And we're going to use the Greenbelt Cooperator articles from that and the news review to date some of these garden plots because we simply don't have any other information on when they were ended. There were approximately 10 plots at the water tower site, so it's a small location. However, we don't know exactly where it was. Now, if we look back at this 1938 satellite photo of Greenbelt, the road that you see at the top of the screen with the yellow box is what is today Ridge Road. It was Ridge Road at the time, but it was not in the same state that it is today. It was a dirt road. And of course, there were no defense homes there. We do know that the water tower was located there because the water tower is still there. And you can see the water tower there on the left. And by looking at this photo, there are very few places where this water tower garden could have been. The site that is very likely is a site along Ridge Road to the north of Ridge Road, just about touching the property of the Beltsville Agricultural Center. The reason why this is likely is that spot would have been exposed to the sun. It was a very sunny location and it was flat. That location closely corresponds with a piece of property that is now called Park Number 16. We don't know exactly the shape of the water tower area. We luckily do have this map from Angus McGregor's little sketchbook. It doesn't give us a whole lot of information except that it was perhaps a triangular shaped plot of land. And it does notate that there's a shed on there, but unfortunately, that is something we can't locate to this day. So it does seem that the water tower garden spot is likely this current small city park up on Ridge Road that does indeed have a playground. Now, to bring up a related topic, this was not an area, even though it was outside of town, that was empty or not used in any other way. We do know that up by the water tower, from about 1937 to 1940, there was an observation point that was created with a parking space and a map shelter. It was a place where visitors could come and look out over the town of Greenbelt and compare the built town with the map that was in the map shelter. This was removed sometime before World War II, likely after the community had filled up, so probably even before then. So there would have been lots of visitors, I mean, thousands of visitors driving up to this spot on the weekends and during the weekday during that time period. It was a long way to trudge up there with water buckets. And so undoubtedly, the ability to drive your car up there was very important. The next original property that we're going to discuss is one that's probably a little more familiar to a lot of Greenbelters, and that is the Boyle property. The Boyle property garden spot was active from 1938 to 1955. These garden plots were located to the north and the east of the Boyle farmhouse. This farmhouse eventually became the American Legion, which still exists to this day. In 1943, during World War II, when demand for garden plots was at its highest, some additional plots were located briefly across the American Legion, across Branchville Road from the American Legion. Back to our 1938 view, there we can see where the farmhouse and the garden plots were located along Branchville Road, just outside of the community. The Boyle farmhouse was part of the Boyle property, one of the properties that was purchased in the Greenbelt project. As I said, we have a lot of evidence of the existence of this. It's mentioned a lot in oral histories. In this particular oral history, Cassie May Stone says that during and after the war, the American Legion marked off a lot of small garden plots on land they had and allowed people to try to raise extra food. Some people didn't do this, but once because they didn't understand all the work it takes to have a bountiful harvest. Because Mama and Daddy grew up on a farm, they knew how to grow a lot of vegetables, and Mama always had managed to get enough, so we had plenty to eat during the winter. Now, just to note that the federal government had those garden plots made and not the American Legion. Just a minor technicality on that reminiscence. But the American Legion was called just an old farmhouse. East of it were garden plots and woods. Greenbelt Road did not exist in the form it does now. And I remember the gardens at the American Legion home where Dad and I walked on the old two-lane road to tend the beans and tomatoes. That was likely Branchville Road. This is another satellite shot that was taken in 1945. You can see the American Legion post there, and the community gardens are marked. Notice the distinct shape. There are two sections to the community garden plot. There is a road that goes between these two sections, and that likely is what provided access into these garden plots. We are lucky to have a sketch from 1951 of what the Boyle garden plots were. We do know that in 1942, that from one of the memos from Mr. Braden, that there were 80 garden plots, and the map that we do have shows approximately that number. Interesting to note that next to the Boyle property was another property called the Simmons property, and that was considered as a temporary garden site during the Victory Garden boom of World War II. Mr. McGregor sketched out how many garden plots they could fit into that space, but the Simmons property was never used as a garden location. Now, as we know, these garden plots do not exist today. How do we account for chipping away of these garden plots? Well, it started in 1947 when the Legion Post purchased the house and 3 surrounding acres. They built a 40 by 80 hall behind the farmhouse. That removed some garden plots, as we can see in this article from the Greenbelt Cooperator. And then later on, by 1955, we can see from an article in the Greenbelt No Name. It was called the Greenbelt No Name at this point because they had not yet decided on a name for the newspaper. They wanted to, after the sale of Greenbelt, discontinue the use of the name Cooperator, and they had not yet picked the name News Review yet. So it literally was the Greenbelt No Name paper. But I digress. Once the American Legion formally dedicated the house, we see that they stopped allowing the area used for gardens. And if we look at a modern overhead view of the space, the two green areas, shaded areas, essentially show the location of where those garden plots would have been, with the farmhouse portion of the community of the American Legion circled in yellow. The next garden spot is the Magruder property. This property has been active since 1938 to the present, with an asterisk. More on that momentarily. This garden plot is located south and southeast of Ridge Road, opposite of 21 Court Ridge. Now, the Magruder property, which we see in this 1938 aerial, was another, of course, farm property that was purchased by the federal government for the Greenbelt project. We can see the Magruder plot here in this sale map. And essentially, this plot of land was located across from 21 Court, and it was located in what was an area sort of behind the natural ridge of Ridge Road and the community in a bowl. And this photograph that I'm showing you now is from the Greenbelt Museum's collection. It's a photo by Casco, and I don't believe that it has been published or used before this presentation. It was very exciting to find this photo. What you can see in this photo is a gardener working on his garden circa 1952. You can see the rise of Greenbelt behind him, the rise of Ridge Road, the defense homes over his one shoulder, would be 20 Court Ridge, and the block homes that rise above the road is 21 Ridge. And you can really see in this way, number one, the topography of the area, that this garden spot was in a bowl. And you can also notice that people marked off their garden plots simply with stakes and twine, that they weren't using fences or any other kinds of barriers. And this is another shot from the Casco collection. There was a road that ran through the area to provide access not only to this part of the garden space, but to the southern portion. Now, it is important to point out that the Magruder spot, which also was called the Old Garden location, the Old Garden spot, extended much farther south than the small part that remains today would indicate. You can see in the 1938, you can tell that they are starting to extend that garden spot all the way south. You can see from this 1947 aerial that the community garden spots extend farther south than they do today. The road that I referenced from the previous photo, you can see that road coming down off of Ridge Road and then extending eastward along the Magruder garden spot. How many spots, garden plots, were in the Magruder garden area? Well, at one point in one of the early memos, Mr. Braden indicated that south of Block C, there are about 115 gardens, and that garden space was going to be convenient from those in blocks D, J, and C. We also know that the Garden Club agreed to relinquish several plots in order to build an elderly housing project. This was in 1961. While that did not happen at the time, this action spurred GHI to document how many garden spots were in the Magruder garden plot. And I'd like to take this moment to point out the different areas that made up the Magruder garden plot. So if you look at this map, you will see the distinctive shape to the left of the community gardens tag of garden plots that were there in that sort of bowl area, and they extended along a line farther south. And then to the east, along this dirt road that ran through, you see all of these other garden spots that are extending up behind 24, 26 courts and 4 court of Southway. So there were two rather distinct areas in the Magruder garden plots. And this was documented by GHI. And you can see here that they made a survey of these spots. And you compare that with the old satellite image there. We can see that distinctive shape. And in 1961, this distinctively shaped area, which is notated inside the yellow, had 21, or based on which sketch is accurate, 24 garden plots. And then there were 43 garden plots in that easterly part behind 24, 26, and 4 courts. That gives us a total in 1961 of about 85 garden plots. If you remember in 1938, they said about 115 garden plots. So we're by 1961, we are already seeing attrition. What is that due to? There were two big projects that started to take away garden spots. The first was the construction of the Lutheran Church, which is located at 22 Ridge Road. And this Lutheran church, you can see in this 1968 view here, was located just south of Ridge Road. The Lutheran church was a white concrete building built similar to other architecture in Greenbelt. And the image to the left is the front of the Lutheran church as seen from Ridge Road. And to the right, you can see the Lutheran church from the back. It was sort of built into the rise of the natural ridge there. The second project that affected the Magruder garden plots was the construction of the Baltimore Washington Parkway, which was completed in 1954. And you can see that the Baltimore Washington Parkway cut through the Magruder garden plot and basically, at first, isolated and then eliminated a lot of the southern garden spots that we saw in the previous garden uh, satellite view from 1938. The Lutheran church was eventually sold to the city. They built another church that they currently still occupy on Greenbelt Road. And the city of Greenbelt turned the Lutheran church into a community center. But by 1977, another need became more pressing for the community. And the Lutheran Church Community Center was demolished in 1977. We can see on this the road that I have been talking about, how they access these garden spots. And this becomes important because this dirt road, which came down by the Lutheran church, then cut across, would cut down south when before the parkway to access the garden spots that were down that way. And it would also continue easterly so that residents could access the garden spots located behind the forecourt of Garden Way. This is all, this access point is very important because when the Lutheran Church was demolished in 1977, on that spot in 1979, they constructed Green Ridge House, the elderly housing facility, which is there to this day. And we see in this satellite image of 1980, Green Ridge House finally completed. And with the construction of Green Ridge House, essentially all of the Magruder garden plots in the western part of the area ceased to exist. These shots show looking at behind the uh, Green Ridge House to where the garden spots previously were located. Access, as I said, was going to be a problem because those garden spots were behind forecourt of Southway were now isolated. And that was fixed in 1983 when the town of Greenbelt decided that they needed to build a overpass over the Baltimore Washington Parkway for high school students to go to the newly constructed Eleanor Roosevelt High School. And so, in order to use that overpass, of course, an access road had to be completed. And so, the access road was given double duty of not only creating access to the overpass, but it provided access to the garden plots in the Magruder plot that had been isolated and cut off by the construction of Green Ridge House. And so today, that isolated garden spot is called Greenway Gardens. And it is the only original part of Greenbelt's 1938 gardens that is existing to this day. So I urge all of you, if you've not been out to this area, to please go visit the original garden site. Just to quickly recap how it was all chopped down. We can see from this image, modern image, 1938, that would have been the extent of the gardens. You can see how they would have extended farther south than the parkway, in fact, onto the area that is today Greenbrier. After the construction of the parkway, that was lost. 1979, the loss of more garden spaces due to Greenridge House. And then finally in 1984, we end up with only the easterly portion of the original lot. Thank you to the Garden Club for providing this map. There are now currently only 26 garden plots in the Gardenway Gardens compared to about 115 originally. The next garden area to original garden area is called the Rapport property. And that was a garden spot that was active from about 1938 to 1979, but not continuously. It's fairly easy to pinpoint where this was. It was at a piece of property at the end of Northway Extended. I love the photo that I used in this slide, but I do have to point out that it is not taken in Greenbelt. Back to our 1938 satellite view, we can see the Rapport property dangling out at the end of Northway Extended. Also quite a hike. If you had a spot in the Water Tower Gardens or the Rapport Gardens or out at the Boyle household, you had a lot of work to keep your garden going because all of your equipment and all of your water had to be hauled out to the spot. Here we can see the Rapport property delineated in the sale map. Now, I say that this garden spot was used not continuously. It is a little bit of detective work to figure out when it was in use and when it was not in use. It seems that it was garden space from about 1938 to 1946 and 1947 to 1955 when it was used as garden plots. We do have some oral history that suggests this was a very well-known garden spot. From Naomi Boots Williams. My father and I picked berries every summer along Greenbelt Road and Edmonston Road in the vicinity of Greenbelt Junior High. My mother made a delicious dessert called blackberry flummery. My father worked very hard at gardening in the heat of summer. He had a little plot of land in back of what we used to call the dirt road, which is now Northway Extended. He took great pride in his garden and had to hand carry water by buckets to water it. We always enjoyed his fresh vegetables. Now, the Rapport garden plots we can see here on this menu, I'm sorry, on this article. Uh, about 95 garden plots originally were plotted in that area. Again, thank you, Mr. McGregor, for providing us with this sketch of the Rapport garden plot area. However, it was not only used for gardens. When the federal government built defense homes in the area in 1941, much of that community was not sodded. It was just a big old muddy mess. And the federal government bureaucracy decided to leave it to the town to take care of this problem for themselves. Angus McGregor was tasked with growing sod to use in the to use in the defense homes. Excuse me. The Rapport property was used for growing sod for the defense homes. And this took away garden plots. You can see in the snippet from the cooperator, garden plots 49 through 100. But the map on the other side is that are indicated on this map. And that's a lot of sod. And so the federal government had to take some garden spots out of circulation. Then from 1955 to 1975, the Northway site was used as the city's landfill, and garden plots were again discontinued. And we can see from these satellite views from 1965 and 1977, the difference. In 1965, that is not area that is under cultivation, but 1977, it does look like it is an area being used for gardens. And then another chip was taken away when NASA purchased some of that city land in order to build their BW Parkway interchange for Goddard Space Flight Center. This was done in the late 1960s. And so then from 1975 to 79, with this interchange right there, the Northway area was used again for temporary garden plots. Now, at this point, we also start to see in play another interesting factor, and that is that at this time, there was a real shortage of recreation space, specifically ball fields, in the city of Greenbelt. And the city was really struggling with the use of public space at this time. And one thing was, do we want to use this Northway area for gardens, or do we want to, quote unquote, put it to better use, as they saw it, as ball fields and recreation space? They eventually came to the conclusion that if they allowed the garden club to use the Northway space for a couple of years, that the garden club would help establish that ground as fertile and as healthy by their very actions. Because if you recall, it was the site of the city dump. And so by gardening there, they would put nutrients back in the soil, and it would be a lot easier and a lot more of a pleasant site to turn into ball fields later on. And so, as the city council was looking to ball field locations, the 4-acre sanitary landfill at Northway, as they were calling it, would be made into a recreation area with two softball fields and a football soccer field. And we can see this progression in these satellite images. 1938, when the area is used as gardens, 65 when it is not, and 77 when it is returned. Today, 2023, the area doesn't get a lot of use recreationally. The bypass, the exit for the BW Parkway is still there. The area is currently still laid out for use as ball fields, but does not get regular use. And it is also used as an area to do composting and mulching, an area or a function that is a little closer to its use as garden space, but has not been used as gardening space since the late 1970s. So we have talked about the four major garden areas, the four original Greenbelt garden areas. Um, there is one more major garden area that we do need to talk about, and it is not original because it did not start in 1938, but it is one that we still have with us today, and that is the Crab property. The Crab property garden plots were in use from 1940 to the present. This is a garden area that is located east of Ridge Road along the Oldham Farm Road, Hamilton Place. This spot, as we can see on the 1938 map, part of the Crab property, which lies directly to the east, adjacent to the Magruder property. But this plot of land had not been purchased by the federal government in time to incorporate it into the 1938 planned community. But by 1938, the federal government had purchased this land, the Crab property, and it was to become a new garden tract. It was intended to be permanent garden space and a very large garden space. They also intended, and this is one of our biggest urban legends, if you will, about this gardening area, is they were intending to put a permanent water source out to these gardens. We don't know if that was done or not. We have not found any indication that it was. It may have been put down and it was pulled out at some point. But as a permanent garden spot, it was going to have irrigation. Now, the crab farm, this crab garden tract, has some very interesting features. If we look at this 1937 photo, you can see the road that starts sort of at the center of the screen and extends down. That is today Hamilton Place. That road has not changed. It was called the Oldham Farm Road because the farmhouse inside that yellow square on the map, that is the Oldham Farm. And it was a farmhouse that stood there at the time. Most of the garden black and white photos that have been used in this presentation and that you will find online, and they were taken in the crab property area. And they do feature in a lot of the photographs. And so we can see two photographs here where the Oldham farmhouse is visible. And here we have a obituary for Jasper Oldham, who was the last Oldham family member to live in the area. And shortly after his death, the farmhouse was pulled down. Also in that area is the Hamilton Family Cemetery. There is a commemorative case that was erected by the city of Greenbelt to display the broken gravestones from the Hamilton Cemetery. As of this recording, those gravestones are still in protective custody of the city until a new and better protective case can be constructed. But the cemetery was located in the wooded area behind this sign. These are photos from the Greenbelt Cooperator in 1940, showing the inaugural season of the crab property farms. And you can see all these industrious Greenbelters out there working the land. Now, these garden sites, again, were going to be permanent garden spots. They were going to charge $1, and they did charge $1 to plow and fertilize the area. And also that dollar was presumably for whatever water service may have been available at these garden plots. Initially, these garden plots were laid on the property along Oldham Farm Road, Hamilton Place, all the way to Ridge Road. We can see that also in this 1940 map. However, what comes to change all of this? A very important development, the Victory Gardens. Victory Gardens were very, very popular in Greenbelt at the time. Vegetable, fruit, and herb gardens were planted at private residences and public parks during World War I and World War II. We are very familiar with the World War II Victory Gardens. And this is because government really encouraged Victory Gardens in order to supplement rations and to boost morale and to reduce the pressure on the food supply. So the gardens were civil morale boosters, and residents were really made to feel empowered by their contribution of labor, and they were rewarded by the produce that was grown. Victory Gardens very much became a daily part of life on the home front. And Victory Gardens were very, very popular in Greenbelt. And this is example of different images that were used to promote Victory Gardens. And in the Cooperator, they would run many, many, many articles to help Greenbelters to plant their gardens and to make their gardens successful. You can see here a garden planting chart, which I still would cut out and put on my refrigerator if I were trying to grow a garden. It's extremely helpful information. This handbook for the garden was handed out to all residents. And as we mentioned before, the cooperative made all kinds of products available to residents. These kinds of incentives really encouraged residents to plant Victory Gardens. They used eye-catching posters and advertisements and pamphlets and made sure that residents knew that by planting a Victory Garden, you were being very patriotic and thrifty. Now, Greenbelt's allotment gardens were ready-made for Victory Gardens, and oral histories reveal that many residents remember gardening specifically in wartime. The Greenbelt Cooperator ran many, many articles, weekly articles, at one point about victory gardens. They had a whole column called "So You're Having a Victory Garden," which gave encouraging and helpful advice to having a victory garden that was successful. Told you more about pole beans, perhaps, than you wanted to know. And the cartoonists of the time also got into the act by having funny little cartoons about victory gardens. This one on the left, if you lived in Greenbelt, you understood that this was on a flat roofed house. The victory garden phase also marks the height of the garden usage in Greenbelt. 1938, there were about 300 gardens that were in use. 1943, the peak year of garden use in Greenbelt, it is estimated that 700 gardens were put into use in Greenbelt. At the start of the end of the war, we do see that decline down to 400. By 1946, all the way down to 146. And we do know that today in 2023, there were 89 gardens. So victory gardens really marked the apex of garden use in Greenbelt. Not interest necessarily, but the number of gardens that were in circulation. Now, the Crab Property Garden Spot also had some development projects that shaped the number of garden spaces that were there. The first was a small building project that was undertaken. After the defense homes were built, it was decided that a proper maintenance facility was needed. This maintenance facility was built on Oldham Farm Road and in true Greenbelt style. There was a lot of grumbling about this because the gardeners in town insisted that this maintenance building was built on the best soil that was available. This garden building, of course, still stands, and it is the GHI administration building. We can see here in 1942 with the construction of the defense homes, they took away gardens that were all the way into Ridge Road. So they pulled that garden area back a bit behind 34 Court, behind 36 Court. Then they put the maintenance building down. Then in 1953, the sale of the town isolated garden plots on private land between GHI property and the Baltimore Washington property. When the town was sold, this land where the garden sat became part of parceled plots that were bought by developers. Then the GVHC, the precursor to GHI, set in and said we would put out some permanent garden sites on some of our land. And this area is the area in front of the administration building today. And so after 1953, after we have the sale of the town, the crab garden area really splits into two distinct areas. And these two areas pretty much remain with us today, and they are known as Henry's Hollow and Hamilton Way Gardens. So in 1938, you can see here, this was the size of the Crab Farm garden plot area. That shrinks down in 1941 with the construction of defense homes along Ridge Road. That is further cut with the construction of the maintenance building, today's GHI administration building. And then in 1953, we have the loss of the gardens in front of that, and we just have the one garden space to the east of the building. 1957, we regained that bit of garden space in front of the building. And then today in 2023, we have the two distinct spots. The loss of garden spots to the east of the administration building was for the creation of the RV and boat storage lot for GHI. Now, how many spaces were in the crab garden plots? Again, in 1942, it looks like we had about 62 garden spots. This was a sketch that uh, uh, was done by Mr. McGregor. Then in 1961, GHI does a survey, and we have 52 garden plots in that area. As of 2023, there are 28 garden plots in the Hamilton Place garden area and 35 garden plots in Henry's Hollow, of various sizes. They were not all 20 by 20 any longer. Henry's Hollow, it must be mentioned, was named after the enthusiastic resident gardener John Henry Jones. Then the last property that we want to talk about, that was put into use during that war period is the Smith property. We don't know a lot about this one. It was active approximately 1942 to 1946. This garden spot was located south of Glendale Road next to Schramm Airport and contained about 39 garden plots. So our 1938 map shows us where the Smith garden spot was located at the time. It was a rectangular plot of land just south of Glendale Road, again, next to the airport. If we try to put that on a modern day map, it is roughly located in an area that straddles Greenbelt Road, uh, between the teardrop shaped island in the BW Parkway interchange there, all the way down into the parking lot of Greenway Center, underneath what used to be Chevy's and what is now Wendy's. The first mention of the Smith Gardens was made in 1942. This was a garden space that was quickly set up in the rush of Victory Garden allocation. The last mention of the Smith Gardens was in 1947, when it was removed from circulation because of the construction of the BW Parkway. And again, we come to the sale of Greenbelt in 1953, and all the garden plots come out of federal ownership and into multi-private ownership. How did the sale affect the gardens? Well, first and foremost, the administration and the assignment of gardens was transferred from the federal government to the Greenbelt Garden Club. That does not mean that the Greenbelt Garden Club owned that property. That simply means that the garden club was responsible for assigning the garden plots on a yearly basis as needed. We know that this transaction happened. All of the records for the garden club were turned over by Mrs. Mary Jane Kinzer to Mr. Hans Jorgensen. Miss Mary Jane Kinzer, well known as the tenant selection office director, and Mr. Jorgensen was well known as a member of the Greenbelt Veterans Housing Cooperative, and he was an avid gardener. And so he sort of took on that role of receiving the records, the assignment records, from Mary Jane Kinzer. And to my knowledge, those records have not been located. And if anybody does know of their existence or knows possibly where they may have gone, again, please contact the museum or via email, or leave a comment in the comments below. So Greenbelt was basically chopped up into various parcels, and we can see here the Northway site did remain as city property. The area around it was parceled off. So Hamilton Gardens actually became part of Parcel 2, and the Magruder Gardens also in part of Parcel 2. But these were owned by developers and not by the city and not by GHI. The former Water Tower Gardens, we have no idea really what happened with that, but very likely became part of the city park up on the north end of town. Now, as the pressures of war eased, Greenbelters enjoyed the green spaces that were available to them. Gardening did not carry with it the seriousness of the war years. Many technological advances refined during the war, and synthetic fertilizers and pesticides became more widely available and were liberally used. Environmental awareness increased in the 60s and 70s, and widespread social upheaval spawned more interest in living more naturally. And because of that national trend, we do start to see in the 1970s more interest in gardening and the need for more gardening space. And as we mentioned before, this is going to coincide with a parallel need for more recreation space in the city. And so the gardeners and the ball players were going to sort of have to jostle for space in the city for gardening and for playing ball. Now, one of these newer garden spaces is called Lake Park Gardens. This was active from about 1974 to about 1980. And this was a garden spot that was located south of the city warehouse and west of Greenbelt Lake. So if we look at this big map in 1977, you can see towards the left of the map the shape of Greenbelt Lake, and you can see inside the yellow square. You can see the what was called the city warehouse. It's now the Public Works facility, and we see from the news review in 1975 that council tentatively approved the use of certain city properties for the establishment of garden plots, pending a review of the city's Park and Recreation Advisory Board. One of the land areas that was approved was the old landfill property, which we've discussed, the Rapport property, and also this area to the south of the Public Works building at the Greenbelt Lake Park. There were no plans to use that area, but they only gave permission for the garden club to use that area for 1 year only. So in 1977, we can see to the left where the gardens have been laid out. The 2023 view of the same area is to the right. It's an area that is currently occupied by the newer Public Works building and recycling area. And this is a photo, modern photo, looking from the lake parking lot towards this new Public Works building, towards the area where the gardens would have been located. Another property that was used as garden space was the Fury property. This garden spot was in use from about 1976 to about 1980, but it could have been longer. We don't have an exact time frame for this. The Fury property garden was located north of Ridge Road and east of Lakeside North Apartments on private land owned by the Fury family. This is a little different from what has happened before because this was not city property, and this was not a proper public garden, but it was such a prominent one, and it was such a larger garden spot that I've decided to include it in the canon of our garden spots. And so here we go again with piecing all of this together with breadcrumbs that we can find in the news review. And we see in 1977, this was the first time that this lake spot is mentioned. And it's in a article about the garden club picnic. There's nothing that says that this spot is going to be open, but we do see that whoever is in charge of this area, the Fury property, needs to bring salad to the garden club picnic. And so that's how we kind of find out that this was even in use. And so if we look at the satellite image in 1980, lo and behold, that Fury garden property is very easily to discover. However, we don't see it after 1980. By 2023, however, that spot is still in its same shape, the spot where the gardens were. However, it is private property. And so I encourage you, if you want to see the location, you can go and view it from the parking lot of the Lakeside North apartment complex. But please respect the private property signs that are posted and do not trespass. Another garden spot that was started in the 1970s was at 11 Southway. And this one, we really don't have a lot on this, but we believe was active from about 1978 to about 1980. And this was located in the rear of 11 Court Southway and the BW Parkway. Again, if we look at this map in 1980, you can see all the way along Southway on the bottom part of your map where the garden is located. The 1980 satellite image clearly shows an area that is being used as some kind of garden space. We find out again from this in Garden Club News in the News Review in 1978 is the first time it's mentioned. And it is only mentioned in the context of uh, making sure that of plot assignments. And you can see there 11 Southway is indicated. So something was happening there. We don't have much record of 11 Court Southway as a garden after 1980, after the 1980 satellite view. And as of 2023, the area is entirely overgrown. It is an area owned by GHI and is part of the garden preserve. The Woodland Committee is making improvements to the area, but it is not for use of gardening. And it's called GHI Parcel 1, and they are regenerating the habitat. They are trying to clear out invasives, but this is not a garden spot. You can see the same overhead view here of that location shows that it is not uh, uh, useful for gardens. So the garden areas that we currently have, Henry's Hollow, Hamilton Place, and the Gardenway Gardens are located currently in parcels that were purchased as part of the Greenbelt Forest Preserve. And before I mention that, I do want to point out that 1,000 acres of open space in 1950 was transferred was kept by the federal government to create Greenbelt National Park. Now, the current and remaining garden locations are within the Greenbelt Forest Preserve. And the Greenbelt Forest Preserve is a 254-acre forested landed area that is protected and conserved in their existing natural state for the use and enjoyment of present and future generations. The forest preserve serves a vital function by providing a link between residents of the city and nature. The forest preserve is part of Greenbelt's cultural identity, its ambiance and sense of place. It adds to Greenbelt's air and water quality, and ultimately, by reducing stormwater runoff, improves the quality of the Chesapeake Bay. By providing a form of passive recreation, it contributes to the health and wellness of Greenbelt residents. And you can see here in these maps where the garden areas are located within that garden preserve. When the Forest Preserve was created in 2003, it originally contained only two tracts, the North Woods and the Hamilton Woods. In 2007, the Forest Preserve Task Force recommended that the city add four more tracts to the Forest Preserve. And so today, our garden spots are housed within this forest preserve, which creates a little bit of a tension in the way that these two different areas are to be used. The forest preserve, which advocates for leaving everything to remain in its natural state, versus the garden space, which needs to be cleared and the garden spots need to be able to get the proper amount of sun. And so the current leadership of the Forest Preserve and the Garden Club are working together to have a solution that is mutually beneficial to both groups. And so there we have it. We have 8 garden plots that have been identified through research. Today, we are down to 3 of those garden spots. However, Greenbelt's garden spaces uh, really do serve our community well. They offer all residents the opportunity to spend their time in the fresh air. Just as the playgrounds, ball fields, and wooded spaces encourage children to go outdoors, the gardens present residents of all ages the chance to be outside and participate in healthful activity. And so our garden spaces, together with all of the other little pocket gardens and green spaces throughout Greenbelt, are an integral and vital part of Greenbelt's history. I'd like to thank you very much for listening to this presentation. If you have any questions about material here or any questions about gardens, please feel free to contact us at the museum, greenbeltmuseum.org. And also, you can leave questions in the comments below. Thank you very much.